She yanked the blanket straight out of my sister's hands. Not slowly, not by accident. One sharp pull that snapped the fabric tight and ripped the breath out of Emma's chest. The cabin jolted at the same moment, a pocket of turbulence shaking the overhead bins, and suddenly every sound on the plane felt too loud. "Hey, stop!" someone gasped. My sister froze, fingers clawing at empty air. Her breathing collapsed into short, panicked pulls, the kind that meant she was losing control. That blue blanket wasn't comfort, it was the only thing keeping her grounded at 30,000 feet. The woman stood half out of her seat, clutching it like a prize. "I'm cold," she said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. "This is airline property. She doesn't need it." I stepped into the aisle and took the blanket back, placing it over my sister's shaking hands. "Touch her again," I said calmly, "and you're done." She smirked, confident, untouchable. "You really think you can threaten me on a plane?" she whispered. I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "No," I said. "I'm telling you what happens next." And that was the moment she should have stopped. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look embarrassed. The woman settled back into her aisle seat like nothing had happened, smoothing her jacket, chin-lifted eyes, already scanning for the next opening. When the flight attendant stopped beside us, she spoke first fast, rehearsed, confident. "I'm freezing," she said. "And that blanket, it looked like Airline issued. I thought it was shared." She paused, then added her name with a small, deliberate nod. "Brenda." Not because anyone asked. Because people like her believed names carried weight. The attendant glanced at my sister, then at the blue blanket clutched tight against her chest. I explained calmly that it was a personal item, not airline property, not available. My sister nodded without looking up, shoulders, tense fingers locked into the fabric. Brenda exhaled loudly as if patience itself had limits. "So, she gets special treatment," she said, "because I paid for my seat too." That was her rhythm. Every boundary was an offense. Every refusal became someone else's failure to be reasonable. She leaned slightly into the aisle again, lowering her voice just enough to sound rational. "Planes are cold," she said. "Adults learn to share." I met the flight attendant's eyes and shook my head once. No argument, no drama, just facts. Brenda noticed the shift. Her mouth tightened. "Well," she said louder, now inviting the cabin into it, "I don't want problems. But I'm not going to suffer because someone else can't handle discomfort." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was watching. And Brenda smiled, convinced it was finally on her side. She had no idea she'd just crossed from annoying into documented. Brenda didn't wait long. The moment the flight attendant moved past our row, her elbow drifted outward, invading the narrow space between seats. Not touching the blanket yet, just close enough to test reactions. "You know," she said casually, eyes forward, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't answer. She took that as permission. Her fingers brushed the edge of the blue fabric light, almost playful. My sister flinched instantly, pulling the blanket tighter around her torso. The movement was small, but panic rippled through her posture like a wire pulled too fast. "That's enough," I said. Brenda sighed, exaggerated loud. "I wasn't even grabbing it," she replied. "You're very jumpy." A few heads turned. She noticed and leaned into it. "I'm just cold," she added, projecting her voice. Apparently that's offensive now. I shifted slightly, angling my body so she couldn't reach across again without making it obvious. She clicked, her tongue annoyed. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Some people think the world owes them comfort." My sister's breathing hadn't steadied. I could hear it short, shallow, fighting itself. I rested my forearm along the shared armrest, not touching her just there. A boundary she could feel. Brenda watched that too. Her knees started bouncing. Her gaze kept flicking back to the blanket. She wasn't done. She pressed the call button. Once. Then again. Then a third time, sharp and impatient, like she was summoning staff in a restaurant. When the flight attendant returned, Brenda was ready. Shoulders slumped, voice softened, expression rewritten. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, gesturing vaguely at us, "but I'm being made very uncomfortable." The attendant glanced between us. "Can you explain?" Brenda nodded. "They're refusing to return airline property, and when I tried to retrieve it, he got aggressive. That got attention." "I did not," I said calmly. "And that blanket is not airline property." My sister nodded, barely clutching the fabric closer. Brenda scoffed. "It has the same color as the ones you hand out." "It doesn't," the attendant replied evenly. "And personal items are allowed." Brenda's lips tightened. "So anyone can just bring whatever they want now, take more than their share." The attendant turned to me. "Sir, is this a personal blanket?" "Yes," I said. "And she's been told not to touch it." Brenda threw her hands up. "This is ridiculous. I'm being singled out because I asked for basic comfort." The attendant straightened. "Ma'am, you cannot touch another passenger's belongings. If you're cold, I can offer a jacket or adjust the air. I don't want a jacket, Brenda snapped, then caught herself, smoothed it over. I just think people should be reasonable. I'm issuing a verbal warning, the attendant said. Please keep your hands to yourself. Brenda nodded stiffly, but her eyes burned. As the attendant walked away, Brenda leaned toward me, voice low, sharp. You think that means anything, she whispered. Warnings don't stick. That was the first time she sounded certain. 10 minutes passed. The cabin settled into a false calm, engines, steady lights, dimmed conversations reduced to murmurs. My sister tried to close her eyes, but her grip never loosened. Every time Brenda shifted, her shoulders tensed. Brenda watched all of it. She leaned back, arms crossed, then casually said, You know, I fly a lot. I didn't respond. I know how these things go, she continued. Crew takes sides, reports get written, people regret making noise. She glanced at me sideways. You don't want that on a flight. That was the tell. I reached into my jacket pocket, not fast, not dramatic, and pulled out my phone. Not to film, not to threaten, just to check a message that hadn't come through yet. Brenda noticed immediately. Her confidence flickered. I typed a short line, then stopped, waited. When the reply came, I didn't smile. I just locked the screen. Brenda leaned closer. Calling backup, she sneered. That won't help you. Behind us, a couple 2 rows back, had stopped pretending to watch their movie. Across the aisle, an older man tilted his phone slightly, not pointed, just angled. Eyes were open now. Another patch of light turbulence shook the plane. And that's when Brenda lost patience. Her hand shot out again faster, this time fingers hooking the edge of the blanket with intent. Not testing, taking. I caught her wrist mid-air. The contact was brief, controlled. Enough. Don't, I said quietly. She froze. For half a second, fear flashed across her face. Then anger swallowed it. You just touched me, she said loudly. Did you all see that? The cabin went dead still. From behind the curtain, I heard movement in the galley. A pause. Then footsteps. Brenda pulled her arm back, breathing hard, eyes darting. For the first time, she wasn't sure who was watching. And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just between us anymore. The footsteps from the galley didn't rush. They didn't hesitate either. The curtain parted just enough for the lead flight attendant to step through, posture straight, eyes already sharp. She took in the scene in less than a second, my hand back on the armrest, my sister rigid against the window, Brenda sitting too upright, breathing too fast. What's going on? The attendant asked. Before I could speak, Brenda jumped in. He grabbed me, she said, voice trembling on cue. I tried to retrieve airline property, and he put his hands on me. The attendant didn't react. She looked at me. She tried to take my sister's blanket again, I said. After being warned, my sister nodded, barely. Her knuckles were still white. The attendant turned to Brenda. Ma'am, you were instructed not to touch their belongings. I didn't touch anything, Brenda snapped. They're exaggerating. From 2 rows back, a quiet voice cut in. That's not true. The couple behind us finally looked up. The woman lowered her screen. She reached for it. We saw it. Across the aisle, the older man spoke without raising his voice. She's been doing it all flight. The cabin shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a collective recalibration. The attendant inhaled slowly. Ma'am, she said to Brenda, I'm going to ask you to remain seated and refrain from speaking while I clarify this with the cockpit. Brenda laughed sharp and brittle. You're calling the pilots over a blanket, yes, the attendant replied evenly. Because this is now a safety issue. That word landed. Safety. Brenda's color drained slightly. This is ridiculous, she muttered. The attendant stepped into the aisle and leaned down toward me, lowering her voice. Sir, she said, I need to ask, are you affiliated with aviation security or federal transport in any capacity? I didn't answer immediately. I reached into my wallet and slid one card into her palm, turned inward, no logos flashing for the cabin. Her eyes scanned it. Just once. Her posture changed instantly. Yes, I said quietly, and I would prefer this handled by procedure. She nodded once. Crisp. Professional. I understand. She turned back to Brenda. Ma'am, she said, voice firm, now you are to remain silent and seated. Any further movement toward these passengers will result in escalation. Brenda stared at her. What escalation? She demanded. The attendant didn't answer. She closed the curtain. The plane felt different after that. Not quieter. Heavier. Whispers passed between rows. Screens stayed dark. Even the engines seemed louder, like the aircraft itself was aware something had shifted. Brenda sat rigid, arms locked to her sides. Her eyes kept darting toward the aisle, toward the curtain, toward the blanket she could no longer reach. My sister didn't relax. Not yet. Her breathing was steadier, but shallow. I stayed where I was blocking the aisle without making a show of it. Minutes passed. Then Brenda cracked. "This is harassment," she said suddenly too loud. "You can't isolate me like this." No one answered. She leaned forward just an inch, testing again. The curtain snapped open. The attendant was back this time with another crew member and a tablet in her hand. "Ma'am," she said, "you have been reported by multiple passengers for disruptive behavior." Brenda shot to her feet. "You're all ganging up on me. Sit down," the attendant ordered. Brenda didn't. Instead, she lunged. Not calculated, not clever. Just raw entitlement surging forward as her hand shot toward the blanket one last time. The timing couldn't have been worse for her. The plane hit a sharp pocket of turbulence. She stumbled into the aisle, balance gone. I stepped forward and caught her wrist firm, controlled, stopping momentum without force. The blanket never moved. "Enough," the attendant said, loud and final. The second crew member was already on the intercom. "This is the captain," a voice filled the cabin. "Remain seated. Security procedures are now in effect." Brenda's face collapsed into something unrecognizable. "Security." She tried to speak. Nothing came out. The attendant turned to her. "You will be met by airport security upon landing," she said. "You are being documented as a disruptive passenger." "This is insane," Brenda whispered. "You can't do this." The attendant didn't blink. "It's already done." Brenda sank back into her seat, shaking now, not cold, not angry, afraid. Across the cabin, phones were still raised, screens glowing, evidence locked. My sister exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. As the plane leveled out, the attendant met my eyes once more. "We'll take it from here," she said quietly. And that was when Brenda finally asked the question she should have asked at the beginning. What did I do wrong? I didn't answer. Because the next part wouldn't happen in the air. The wheels hit the runway with a hard, grounding thud. Applause didn't come. No one moved. The seatbelt sign stayed lit, glowing amber, like a warning that this wasn't over yet. The engines reversed roaring, slowing us down as the cabin remained frozen in place. "Everyone please remain seated," the lead attendant said over the intercom. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight now. "Security personnel will be boarding." Brenda stiffened. Around us, passengers lowered their trays but didn't stand. Phones were already out, some openly, some half hidden. The aisle felt longer than it had an hour ago. Brenda laughed, thin and brittle. "This is ridiculous," she said too loud. "You're really doing this?" Over a blanket, no one answered. The plane rolled to a stop. The engines wound down. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against my chest. Then the front door opened. 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped on board. Not rushed, not aggressive, professional. Their eyes went straight to the lead attendant, who pointed calmly toward the front row, toward Brenda. "Ma'am," one officer said, "please remain seated." Brenda shot to her feet instead. "You can't just take their word," she snapped, pointing wildly. "They provoked me. He touched me. They're lying." Her voice echoed down the cabin. Every eye was on her now. The attendant raised a hand, not at Brenda, but at the cabin. "Several passengers recorded the incident," she said evenly. "And we have crew documentation." The officer nodded and turned slightly. "Ma'am, multiple witness statements confirm you repeatedly attempted to take a personal item, ignored crew instructions, and caused a disturbance." Brenda's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not those videos are illegal," she said. "You can't record me without consent." The officer didn't blink. "Recording disruptive behavior in a public conveyance is permitted." Across the aisle, the older man lifted his phone a little higher. "I've got it all," he said. "Timestamps included." A young woman 2 rows back added quietly, "Me too." Brenda's confidence fractured visibly. Her shoulders sagged as she looked around, finally seeing the cabin the way it had been seeing her. The second officer glanced at the attendant. "And the earlier warning documented," the attendant replied. "Verbal warning issued mid-flight. Ignored." The officer turned back to Brenda. "You are being classified as a disruptive passenger. That includes potential fines, travel restrictions, and further review." Brenda shook her head rapidly. No, you're blowing this up." I was cold. That's all. My sister didn't look at her. She stared straight ahead, hands wrapped around the blanket, breathing slow and deliberate now. I said nothing. There was nothing left to add. "Ma'am," the officer said, "please gather your belongings." Brenda hesitated. Then she laughed again, short, desperate. "You're really going to walk me off like this," she said. In front of everyone, the officer waited. Her laughter died. She bent slowly, grabbing her bag with shaking hands. As she stepped into the aisle, passengers leaned back instinctively, creating space, not fear, just distance. No one defended her. No one met her eyes. As she walked forward, whispers followed, not loud enough to quote, but sharp enough to sting. A shake of the head here, a quiet sigh there. At the door, she turned once more, scanning the cabin like she was searching for a face that would save her. Her eyes landed on me. "You think you won?" she said, voice cracking. "You think this makes you better?" I finally spoke. "No," I said calmly. "I think it makes this flight safe." That was it. The officers escorted her off the plane. The door closed behind them with a dull final click. The cabin exhaled as one. The attendant moved down the aisle, checking seats, restoring order like snapping pieces back into place. When she reached us, she paused. "You're clear," she said quietly. My sister's shoulders finally dropped. She leaned back, blanket still clutched to her chest, eyes closed, not asleep, just relieved. As the seatbelt sign clicked off, people stood but slower now, respectful. A few nodded in our direction. One murmured, "You handled that well." I didn't respond. The crisis was over. And for the first time since boarding, the air felt normal again. The aisle didn't rush back to life right away. People stood slowly, carefully, like the cabin itself needed a moment to settle. A few passengers avoided looking our way, embarrassed by how long they'd stayed quiet. Others didn't. A woman leaned across the aisle and whispered, "I'm glad you stopped her." A man behind us nodded once and said nothing, but the message landed anyway. My sister stayed seated. The blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers curled into the edge of it, not tight anymore, just present. Her breathing had finally found a rhythm. No shaking, no shallow gasps, just air moving in and out like it was supposed to. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded, once, then again, more certain. The lead flight attendant returned, crouching slightly to speak at eye level. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said. "You handled it exactly right." My sister didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her shoulders were down now, her body no longer braced for impact. Around us, the cabin felt different, lighter. People talked again, laughed softly. The tension that had filled the air for hours dissolved into something closer to normal. Brenda was gone, and the space she'd taken with her entitlement didn't refill. Before anyone reached the overhead bins, the second attendant returned, with a tablet and a printed form. "Sir," she said to me, keeping her voice low, "this is the official incident report. Multiple witness statements, crew documentation, and recorded evidence are attached." She didn't slide it toward me like a threat. She offered it like closure. "The passenger has been flagged as disruptive," she continued. "Airport security will be handling the next steps. That can include fines, travel restrictions, and a review with the airline." I nodded. "And for your sister," she added, glancing gently toward the blanket, "we've noted the accommodation. That information will remain in the record, so this doesn't happen again." My sister looked up at that, just for a second. "Thank you," she said quietly. The attendant smiled, small, sincere. "You're protected," she said. "That's the point." She stood, gave a quick nod, and moved on to the next row, leaving us with the hum of idling engines and the quiet understanding that something official had been set in motion and finished without needing another scene. The cabin door finally opened. Fresh airport air drifted in cool and clean, carrying the sound of distant announcements and rolling luggage. Passengers began to move, gathering bags, stepping into the aisle one by one. No one mentioned Brenda's name. No one needed to. My sister stood slowly adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. She hesitated, then folded it once neatly and draped it over her arm, instead of clutching it like a shield. That mattered. We stepped into the aisle together. No rush, no crowd pressing in. A few people smiled as we passed. One woman touched my sister's arm lightly and said, "Take care." At the door, the lead attendant met us again. "You're all set," she said. "Safe travels." As we stepped onto the jet bridge, my sister exhaled long, steady, unforced. "I thought I was going to lose it," she admitted quietly. "In there." "You didn't," I said. She glanced down at the folded blanket, then back up at me. "No," she said. "I didn't." Behind us, the plane emptied. Ahead of us, the terminal waited, bright, ordinary, unthreatening. The flight was over, and so was the assumption that staying quiet was safer than standing firm. At 30,000 feet, boundaries aren't optional, and the moment someone crosses them, the fall is theirs alone.